Okay, so for my project 4, I am doing the video. And my topic that I did was why America needs to keep up our defense spending, and there are several good reasons to back this point up. So America right now has 2 million people serving in the United States military, whether it's an active duty, reserves, or National Guard. And so if we cut funding, these people at these bases, and we're based all over the world, we have about 600 bases currently all over the globe, all the way from the North Pole to the tip of the southern tip of Argentina. And so if we cut this funding, we cut adequate military housing for their families, we cut supplies that they need, and if we cut this stuff, we're basically kind of killing the sense for them to be American and having basic American things that we all take for granted. And when we cut this funding for these people, it also makes people lose jobs. And so there are about 60 air bases in the United States right now, and this is just one of the things I could find, but 500,000 civilians are employed in these Air Force bases. And a lot of these Air Force bases are pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Like, they're in the middle of Iowa, they're in the middle of Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, where not much work is available for these people. And so they rely on these bases for jobs that may not come around often. And so if we shut down some of these bases, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. Another thing is, speaking of jobs, is the impact on our foreign allies and their economies as well. I was reading this thing about these villages in Germany, and we have an air base there. It's called Bromberg Air Force Base and Army Base. It's a joint base. And these people there have basically embraced the American culture. They've built these American restaurants, American inns. They all drive American cars. They drive GMCs, Mustangs. And a lot of them are learning English. The more they're learning about it, they're like, oh, we want to come to America now. And so per year, the base brings in about $200 million just for these villages. And they're closing this base down in about 2 years, and these people are all freaking out because they don't know what they're going to do. They don't know where they're going to work, and a lot of these people are very upset. They're very angry, not just the German government, with our government. And so I think this is going to create a lot of resentment among people, and word spreads quickly. So a lot of these people, it's boarding a lot of Austrian towns, Polish towns, where we keep a lot of influence there. So I think it will have a negative impact if we cut the funding to these bases, because it's hurting our foreign allies too. And another topic I wanted to hit on was the impact of our spending in keeping the world safe. And America has been known as the world's policeman for about 70 years now, since the end of World War II. And right now in the world, you're seeing a growing level of threats, whether it's from China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, who are all trying to grow their territory and express their domain of influence. And that's including the Russians invading Crimea, starting that civil war in Ukraine, the Chinese building these artificial islands, and a lot of our power has to do with our Navy and our sphere of influence, our ability to project our global power. And the Navy has recently came up with a statement saying, oh, we're losing funding right now, and we're not able to produce these newer ships that we need to be able to project into the South Pacific and the North Atlantic, where the Russians and the Chinese are trying to grow. And this is just a problem for us because we have a lot of allies, whether it's in the Baltic states, Norway, Sweden, Finland. And in the South, we have Taiwan, Australia, Japan, and all these people rely on us to help keep these countries in check. And if we are not giving adequate funding to the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army, then we cannot project globally. And this is just a threat to everybody and a threat to our way of life, because if we're not projecting power, then maybe people get a little bit more, these countries get a little more ambitious and maybe start to do things to our allies that we would not want in the world. And so the counterclaim to this is, what kind of negative impact do bases have? And so there are some negative impacts, yes, and I will agree with this. There was a case of the United States and the British back in the 70s and 60s moving these indigenous people off this island called Diego Garcia in the Southern Pacific. But all these people were actually relocated to a nearby island. It's literally like half a mile away. And that's what not a lot of people realize. These people were given several $1,000s each per family. They were given housing, and they were pretty much set up to continue on with their lives. So not everything was completely lost. And a lot of people will argue, we have no business being the world's policeman. And there is some truth to that. The United States has constantly been in wars in the past century, really, ever since the Spanish-American War in the 1890s. So there is the argument that we are spending money to fund wars that maybe we don't need to be in. But the counter argument to this is, we keep the world a lot safer if we are able to project our global power. And this all comes from funding. So the funding helps keep our jobs domestically, it helps our allies keep their jobs in these countries, it keeps everybody happy, and it keeps everyone safe. And that is really the whole goal of military funding, I believe, is to keep the world a safer place, and just to be able to keep us living the American dream that we live today.